It's December 24th, 2018, Christmas Eve. The follow-up to the wildly popular History 2 Crossing the Line, History 3 Trapped, is announced via a 1-minute teaser. The video is barely a minute in length and doesn't really contain much besides a few promo pictures of the cast, and yet it's currently sitting at 300,000 views. I think it's an understatement to say that people went batshit, and as more information was released periodically, that hype grew exponentially. There are many speculations as to why Trapped gained so much traction so early on, but most people agree that the main draw of the series was its plot description. That being an idealistic police detective and a gang leader join forces to solve a mystery and gradually fall in love. Something crucial to understand here is that people were desperate for that sweet, sweet enemies to lovers content. Anyway, Trapped aired during the summer of 2019 to resounding success. And 2 years later, people still cite Trapped as a GOAT in the BL category, myself included. And for good reason. It's a genuinely well-made show with endearing characters and a lot of positive LGBT representation. Trapped's success had a monumental impact. Suddenly, production companies were expanding their horizons to tell new stories outside of college campuses. Flash forward to 2020, enter Manner of Death. Many before me have drawn parallels between History 3 Trapped and Manner of Death. For starters, both series center around a murder mystery and feature a same-sex romance. But when you look past the surface-level similarities and examine the nitty-gritty details of each series, they really aren't all that alike. A determined altruist and a loner with a dark past are forced to work together to solve a murder could technically be a working summary for either show, but there's a key difference here: tone. Despite having similar plot beats, Trapped and Manner of Death are tonally distinct. I mean, the color schemes of each series say it all. Trapped, while having elements of darkness, is primarily a romance. Manner of Death, while possessing elements of romance, is primarily a murder mystery. This isn't me claiming that one series is inherently better than the other. Rather, I think this distinction helps underscore why Manner of Death is revolutionary in more ways than one. The series isn't confined within a university setting, and most importantly, its romance doesn't take center stage. Manner of Death is more concerned with crafting a compelling mystery than telling a love story. The two main characters just happen to be gay and in a relationship. While this detail may affect the plot in minor ways, Ten and Bun's romance isn't strictly necessary for the plot to move forward. My point is, this is practically unheard of in the BL genre. Because these shows are primarily marketed towards straight women, the gay romance element is usually the key selling factor. Hence, these shows prioritize romance first and plot second. But Manner of Death has flipped this order of priorities on its head. Not every episode has tender romantic moments between Tan and Bun. There are several plot-heavy episodes in which their relationship takes a back seat. This was a ginormous risk that the writers and producers of this show consciously chose to take, and I frankly respect them for that. But let's talk gay representation. It's no secret that this show contains a number of pretty intense scenes involving physical intimacy, but I've noticed that the conversation surrounding Tan and Bun's relationship tends to focus primarily on these scenes. Not that there's anything wrong with depicting intimacy on screen, but I don't know. I feel like we don't properly address just how well written their relationship is. I mean, you could maybe argue that they gain each other's trust a bit too quickly near the beginning of the series, but that's a minor nitpick. On the whole, Tan and Bun are a joy to watch. The show has an edge compared to its predecessors by focusing on emotionally intelligent working adults rather than college students. From the first episode onwards, Tan and Bun are clearly interested in each other and aren't afraid to express how they feel. It's pretty standard for BL characters to experience an identity crisis of some sort in light of their feelings for another male character, and that's perfectly fine. Tropes like that have their time and place and can be implemented well. But for Tan and Bun to be emotionally straightforward and confident in their sexualities from the get-go is admittedly a nice change of pace, and is honestly more fitting for a story centering around two men in their late 20s. The conflict is never, I have feelings for you, but I don't know if I can/should express them. It's, I have feelings for you, but we're currently dismantling a corrupt police force, so we really can't focus on our relationship right now. And I just think that's beautiful. Besides that, their romance feels natural, feels authentic, because a significant portion of the show is dedicated to developing their friendship. Tan is eager to support Boon in everything he does, and vice versa. They enjoy doing mundane things together like cooking and watching movies. And perhaps most importantly, they communicate with each other whenever a problem arises. Physical affection is only one small aspect of their relationship, and that's why it works, at least for me. I'm invested in these characters because they consistently express their trust, sincerity, and support for one another. Manner of Death feels like an earnest depiction of two men in love rather than some overly fetishized caricature of what straight women think male same-sex relationships look like. All of that being said, I would be doing this show a major disservice if I didn't talk about its plot. I'll let you in on a little secret. I love murder mysteries. And Manner of Death is not only a whodunit story, it's a good one. And I think this is in part due to the show's use of POV. POV, or point of view, is the lens through which we, the audience, observe the story. Manner of Death is, loosely speaking, third-person limited POV, because we see the world through the eyes of one character, Boon. Emphasis here on loosely since we do have fragments of the story told from side characters' perspectives. Boon is the perfect protagonist for a show like Manner of Death. He hasn't visited Viangpamork in over a decade, and thus he really isn't very knowledgeable about the town, its residents, or its sinister criminal underbelly. So by extension, we don't know much about these things either. This prevents the plot from becoming too predictable. If Boon, and by extension we, already knew everything about Viangpamork and its residents, we could have probably easily discerned who Jane's killer was. Instead, the lack of information we're given helps preserve Manner of Death's air of mystery. Manner of Death also makes use of semi-frequent flashbacks. For example, the show has multiple callbacks to Jane and Puad's confrontation in episode 1. They rehash the exact same scene about 3 times, with only one key alteration: perspective. Similar scenes are peppered all throughout the show, especially in its latter half, and these flashbacks serve as the glue that binds the entire story together. On a similar note, Manner of Death's characters are spectacular. The various conflicts in the show are made much more personal and much more devastating because of the depth given to each individual character. For example, Por, and especially Puad, aren't necessarily good people, and they often do the right thing for the wrong reasons. They're also guilty of frequently mistreating Tan, but neither Por nor Puad are clear-cut antagonists, and both brothers show compassion towards others, including their partially estranged younger sibling. Rather than simply labeling characters as good or bad, Manner of Death allows its characters to reside on a spectrum of morality. This prevents the show's characters from falling flat and frankly makes them a whole lot more intriguing. Granted, I don't necessarily love every single character. For example, I think Sorawit and Tat are written just fine, but I didn't find their story super compelling. Anyways, what interests me the most about Manner of Death is that virtually every character is essential to the narrative. Think of each character as a piece on a chessboard or a cog in a well-oiled machine. For example, the prosecutor wouldn't have been arrested without Nam, Tan and Bud would have likely never found evidence incriminating the higher-ups without Pat, Boon would have likely never known about Jane's abortion without Nurse Fa, you get the point. Even comedic relief characters with less than 30 minutes of screen time are vital to pushing the plot forward. Specifically, Jane is given a lot of agency in the story despite being killed off in the show's opening scene. She's also quite possibly the best character in the entire show, and the more Jane-centric episodes are some of my absolute favorites. For example, episode 13. Episode 13 is arguably the climax of the entire series, or as I like to put it, when shit hits the fan. Tan, Boon, and Inspector Im realize that Puad's old phone is the final piece needed to solve the puzzle of who killed Jane. After said phone is retrieved, the audience is treated to a 20-minute flashback from Jane's perspective, detailing exactly what went down in the months before she was murdered. The cinematography, acting, and music are all absolutely phenomenal. That being said, this episode is not for the faint of heart. Episode 13 accomplishes its mission in making me feel genuinely unsettled. This episode got under my skin and stayed there for a significant amount of time. I could only bring myself to watch it all the way through one time. I think what really scared me the most about Jane's story, besides it being an all too common real-life occurrence, is that the men responsible for her trauma feel real. Real in the sense that they're not cartoonish villains twiddling their thumbs in an evil lair. The fact that these men can commit such atrocities and still seem human is terrifying. This episode also made me realize that Pued is in no way a redeemable character. Here lies my one big problem with the show. Many characters in Manner of Death suggest or even say outright that, oh, Jane being sex trafficked wasn't actually Pued's fault, it was all Rumtiva. And that just isn't true. If he wanted to, Pued could have easily protected Jane from Rumtiva and his boss, but instead he willingly hands her over, knowing full well what will happen to her because he's afraid of losing his job. When Jane threatens to rightfully expose her abuser's crimes, Pued publicly reprimands her and demands she apologize to the men who raped her, his reasoning being that if she doesn't, he'll be in trouble. I'm not saying that Pued is pure evil, but for the show to present him as this redeemable character after this fuckery leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Despite these issues, I still enjoyed Manner of Death immensely. Jane's story in particular draws striking parallels to Thailand's current political climate. Have I mentioned this show hates cops? Because this show really hates cops. Manner of Death isn't perfect by any means. It has its fair share of flaws. But even so, its social commentary never feels disingenuous or romanticized. You could argue that some scenes toe the line between subtlety and ham-fistedness, but I truly believe that the writers and producers of this series were acting in earnest to portray sensitive topics, such as human trafficking, abortion, and government corruption. But there's one aspect of the show that I still haven't discussed. Manner of Death ends on a remarkably wholesome note. Tan and Bun watch together as the sun sets below the lush greenery of Viang Pamork. Fingers intertwined. There's the conspicuous glint of 2 silver rings, a guitar softly strumming, and the screen slowly fades to black. Credits. This scene is incredibly special to me, as is the proposal scene preceding it. People complained that it was too cheesy, too cheerful even, but I think given its cultural context, this finale is all too fitting. There's no explosive fanfare, no celebratory fireworks, it doesn't feel gaudy or exaggerated. Maybe it is cliché that the 2 main characters get married and live their traditional happily ever after, but maybe that's the beauty of it, because that fairy tale ending we all know and love has been routinely denied to characters like Tan and Bun. Manner of Death isn't a perfect show. The music may at times feel out of place, and yeah, maybe not all of the jokes land, and maybe the romantic dialogue is cheesy, but honestly, who cares? For all of its flaws, it is still an immensely enjoyable work that clearly had a lot of love put into it, and I love it. I love these characters to pieces, I love its campy humor, and perhaps most of all, I love the care taken to portray a relationship between 2 men who truly love and cherish one another, who in the end get their happily ever after.